given my personal cultural programming, so much of that seemed like foreign and impossible, and like the idea of compersion and the idea that you could not be horrendously jealous if your partner was dating somebody else, all of that felt like such a massive obstacle and hurdle. And I'm like, the people who are writing these books are superhuman. I could never possibly reach that point in my life or my relationship. And then now I'm like, oh yeah, this is no big deal.
Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jase.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
So whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you, and we're here for you.
On this very special episode of the Multiamory podcast, we want to share stories of people like you, our listeners. In the last few years, we've seen an explosion of content in the media about polyamory and non-monogamy, and for many of us who are in these communities, we've found them frustrating. We've been frustrated by the lack of accurate representation and frustrated by the very narrow range of experiences that the media really wants to share with us. So for this, we've put together little mini interviews with several of our listeners to try to provide another look at what non-monogamy can be and hopefully show you that whatever your experience is right now, there are other people who have gone through something like that or are going through it, and to help showcase the fact that these are real people with real experiences from a variety of locations, different ages, various relationship configurations, and experience with non-monogamy.
My name is Celestine. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I identify as polyamorous. I tend a little more towards the relationship anarchy thing. And I've been doing some form of non-monogamous relationship probably since I was about 18 or 19. I didn't know what polyamory was at that point in time. I didn't know it was a thing. I just kind of knew that monogamy didn't necessarily work for me 100% of the time.
My name is Megan. I'm from Minneapolis. I practice solo poly. I live by myself with my daughter, and I see my partners whenever I have time. And everybody is on an equal playing field, and they typically identify as polyamorous as well. I discovered about 5 years ago and made sure to do a lot of research before diving in. 3 years of research and then 2 years actual living polyamorously.
My name is David. I live in San Antonio, Texas. I've been here for about 40 years. I consider myself polyamorous rather than non-monogamous. Probably my whole romantic life has been polyamorous. I almost always had multiple girlfriends. Our emotional connections with women that were deeply intimate even when I was married.
I'm Leslie. I'm just outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I tend to call what I do relationship anarchy, but it often ends up looking more like monogamy because I don't really put myself out there for dating very often. I've pretty much since I've found out the term, I've considered myself polyamorous. But as far as being functionally poly, probably in the last year or so, I've actually, met people who were okay with that and who didn't just say they were for the sake of being in a relationship with me in the short term.
My name's Jason. I live in Helsinki, Finland. I've been through various stints of non-monogamy over the last 7 years, but for the last 2 years, my relationship has transitioned into a full, open, loving polyamory with essentially no rules.
My name is Annalisa Castaldo. I live right outside of Philadelphia in the United States. And I have been doing egalitarian polyamory for about 12 years now.
I'm Kenzie. I'm in Davis, California, and I'm practicing what I call
busy grad student polyamory where I am technically open, but not really acting on it with anyone other than my two fairly established partners.
I'm Sherm. I live in Houston, Texas. I've been practicing polyamory for about 2 years. In the last 6 months, I've been transitioning to more of a solo poly framework.
I'm Matt. I'm from Austin, Texas, solo poly. Kind of depending on how you count, somewhere between 21 years and like 3. So I got introduced to it way back in high school at some point, and it sounded good. And I was like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. But, kind of backburned it for quite a while and kind of circled back more recently.
My name is Aga. I live in Krakow in Poland. I've been actively non-monogamous for about 2 years now, almost. I have 2 partners. One is long distance and one is a local one. I practice a non-hierarchical polyamory.
I live in Eugene, Oregon at the moment. I am currently identifying mostly as solo polyamorous, and I really love the principles of relationship anarchy. And so I've been practicing polyamory for about 7 or 8 years. And I first came across it as an open relationship sort of a thing, and then learned more about polyamory. And once I learned the word polyamory, like everything blew open.
I've been polyamorous for about 2.5 years, I guess. But we kind of broke up after Christmas this year, so I'm actually single right now. But thanks to relationship anarchy, I guess we didn't really change the situation, so we're still living together and it's really working out fine. So I guess we just de-escalated a bit. And I'm really happy. This is my first nice breakup where we could actually preserve our very loving relationship.
That quality of being able to stay friends and de-escalate and change a relationship while still maintaining a lot of what makes it very special, I think is one of the amazing things that really teasing apart the ways that we look at our relationships can give us. And that's not something that's unique to polyamory or non-monogamy, but I have found that it becomes more possible to people when they're willing to start questioning the assumptions that we have about how relationships have to work or about how we should feel in certain situations.
So my nesting partner / husband, Alex, we opened up our marriage 12 years ago or so. I have one partner who is a wonderful person with whom I could never live, but whom I have shared a very deep connection for 10 years now. He has a live-in partner, and they have a partner, but that's getting a little beyond things. And then on Alex's side, he has a local girlfriend who is a great friend of mine, not a romantic interest, but she's just wonderful. He has a long-distance relationship that has been going on for 8 years now, even though they see each other infrequently. And then he has a couple of play partners.
There's 3 stable relationships right now, 2 women and a man. I've probably, in the past 3.5 years, I've had 4 other female partners that have come and gone. The man was the other partner of one of my female partners. And so we met basically through her and began to connect. The second female partner has 2 long-distance male partners and is in an open marriage. I know her husband. We get along pretty well, but we don't have any real connection.
I've got a person who's very important to me that I have feelings for that are reciprocated. There's a physical relationship, an emotional relationship, everything that you would look at and say, hey, that's a partner. But we don't look at each other and say, hey, that's a partner. So it's unlabeled, very rewarding. And then there's just a couple people that I've been dating casually, but it hasn't really sparked that kind of long-term relationship. I haven't found myself looking for what they would describe as an anchor partner or a nesting partner. It's been really rewarding to be able to live by myself. So I think I'm going to keep doing that for a while.
It's just me and my one partner. Right now we're kind of long-ish distance. He's in New Jersey and I'm in Pennsylvania, and so we see each other like once or twice a week. but we had been living together sort of.
It's just me and my spouse at the moment. I'm currently working on whether I'm having conversations with my former other romantic partner that ended about 1.5 years ago, trying to figure out if we can make that work again, but who knows.
So I've got my partner that I live with, and then a semi-long distance partner who's a 2-hour drive away, and they're dating people. They moved away recently and still are dating other people who live in the same town as me. And so it's very much connected to, like, it's very kitchen table. Like, I'm not dating a ton of people, but like I have a pretty extensive polycule because, like, yeah, it's all very interconnected within the community. Like, most of the people I hang out with are like 2 to 4 degrees of dating separation away from me. And yeah, we all do like play parties together. And yeah, so one of my roommates is a former metamor. We both broke up with the guy, our former shared partner, but got really close while we were dating him and stayed friends.
Now I'm currently in 2 relationships where I feel like a lot more solid in the fact that, like, I feel like my own primary partner. I have a more, I guess, intertwined partner. Like, we don't live together. We're not nesting partners, but we see each other like multiple times a week. And we're doing the self-isolating together. And then I also have another partner who's more of like a comet.
I have one kind of main squeeze, I suppose. We really try not to use the primary moniker, but then I date casually here and there.
So I have one long distance partner. We live in different countries. He's dating other people, but doesn't have any long-term partner at the moment. And I have one local partner. He also is dating right now, but no long-term partners. So I'm basically, the only one in the polycule having multiple partners at the moment.
So maybe it's just because I kind of like numbers a lot, but I kept noticing that the number 2 was in a lot of people's responses. So there have been a lot of people from this episode that talked about practicing non-monogamy or some sort of polyamory for a number of years, but there were quite a few that said that they'd only been doing it for around 2 or 3 years. So that's very interesting. And also many of them spoke about having around 2 partners, which is interesting to note because Dedeker, for instance, also has 2 partners currently and has for many, many years. So maybe to me, that kind of shows that maybe this is the amount of partners that cause somebody to not feel overly polysaturated. Maybe 2 is a good amount of partners for somebody to kind of want to get invested in for long term. So that was interesting to me to note.
I opened up with one of my partners. We were monogamous for a while, and then we decided to open up. And the Multiamory podcast, you guys actually played a big role in that decision. Because, that's how we actually started discussing non-monogamy. And we participated in your workshop in Tokyo. Yeah, that's how we met the community, the local community. And we were discussing it, researching it for a long time. And then at some point we just decided, okay, what the hell? We just need to give it a try. And it's been a very smooth and fantastic journey. And I think also because we spent so much time listening to the podcast, researching, and like kind of learning from you guys. That's why it also went so smoothly for us.
Like, I couldn't decide between my first and my second boyfriend, and I also didn't understand why I had to. So that was when I was like 16. So I kind of always had like very reliable monogamous relationships for about 1 year, and then I got bored or felt trapped, and then like I had some affairs in between that were nice but not very reliable, and then I had a monogamous relationship again, and at some point I was like, well, this doesn't work out clearly. And before I got into my next relationship, I made sure that the guy was actually interested in polyamory a bit, and then we were monogamous for a year, and then we opened up, and it worked pretty fine.
I was in a pretty hierarchical primary headset for a long time until I actually heard your episode 150, Relationship Anarchy. Somebody talked to me about it and said, hey, you really need to look into these multiamory folks. And how I frequently say it is, if my brain was like this far broken open by the concepts of polyamory, that Relationship Anarchy took it the rest of the way. So it was like a halfway opening of the mind, and then Relationship Anarchy took it the rest of the way. And I was like, oh my God.
It was partially kind of looking around at the circles of friends that I kept up forming, falling in with all these poly folks. And they seem really cool and whatnot. So it was an opening up process. Most relationships I had some sort of open component. I wouldn't say they were poly relationships, but weren't completely closed off. And then, when I moved to Austin, it just was like, oh, I don't think I want to try to do a monogamous thing again. I have 2 local partners and 1 long distance, and a couple comments that I see occasionally.
From 16 to 21, I was in a monogamous relationship. It was like really codependent and tight. And so I started looking into polyamory, I think, as like an escape hatch more than anything. I did know that there were a lot of things I just didn't like about my relationship and the way that it felt, that like the philosophy behind polyamory seemed to really address. So when I ended that relationship, from then on, I was like, I will not date you if it's monogamous. So it took some trial and error. The first relationship I was in after that, they were only comfortable with like an open relationship, but not like really polyamory. But I wasn't super happy with that. And ultimately, it seems like he was trying to ignore the fact that like it wasn't just a monogamous relationship as best as possible.
I had like a really intimate friendship that was like non-sexual, but very intimate. And then was also like, dating someone casually, and then who was in a long distance open relationship. And I was like, didn't really like do it on purpose. It's just like how my relationship shook out. And then I graduated from undergrad and started hearing more about polyamory as an intentional thing. I was like, hey, that's kind of what I was doing already. Let's just do this on purpose, because the main problems we all had with the situation were that we didn't know how to talk about it. And I was single at the time, and just started reading things and listening to Multiamory and learned about it, and then like joined a local poly community. I was like, I guess I should meet other people who are interested in this too. And I came into it solo poly.
Alex and I had been together for over a decade, and great relationship, totally solid. And one day he sat me down and he said, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, but I don't think I can continue to only be with you. I really feel the need to connect with other people. And I thought about it for a little while, and I was like, okay, I'd been Buddhist for a long time, and I didn't see why him having sex with someone else would change the way we felt. And at that time, we didn't know what polyamory was. So we tried swinging. That was a huge fail for many reasons. This may be different in different communities or even now. But when we entered the swinging community, it was a very strict sex only, no emotions. But I'm not interested in having a sexual one-night stand. And so I was not enjoying myself. Other big problem is that everything in swinging takes place really late at night. And I'm not a late night person. And so we'd be meeting these couples at 9:00 at night, and I'd already be like wanting to curl up under the table. The third thing that was really problematic is just the drinking. I like alcohol. I'm happy to have a drink or two, but every single couple we went out with, every single one felt the need to get hammered before they felt comfortable doing anything. And I'm like, if you can only have sex with people other than your spouse when you're completely plastered, I'm not interested in that. So I told Alex that I wasn't interested, and that I know that was going to be hard because single men in swinging don't get anything. And so he was looking around, and he actually found the Polyamory Weekly podcast, and he came and he said, there's this thing I've heard about. You can actually date. And I'm like, really? People date? Not just have sex, but they like date? That's weird. And so he got on OkCupid and he went out on a date and he had a great time. And I was like, that's cool, but I hate dating. I don't want to do that. You go, you do your thing. And then we went to a poly meetup, and that's where I met my boyfriend.
Shortly after I moved to Atlanta, I started attending various conventions, nerd conventions. And then there's like adult conventions. There's a big one here called Frolicon. And finding out that like polyamory was a thing. There was a word for like what I kind of wanted to do. And I just didn't know that other people were doing it. And that kind of opened up like a lot of things in my life.
I transitioned a closed relationship, a very long-term relationship. And so it was very tumultuous. We spent about 1.5 years really trying to make it work, and ultimately decided that it was not working because he was very, very monogamous, very kind of patriarchal, really thought that he had entitlements when it comes to marriage and what it means to be a spouse. And so we just didn't see eye to eye. But since we separated, he's been actually more willing to learn about non-monogamy and polyamory, and recently joined a polyamorous dating group so that he could explore it further. And, even despite the de-escalation of the relationship, we were able to maintain quite a deep friendship and a camaraderie. One of the terms that I picked up from Polyland is Duramore. And so that's really how I've been able to reclassify our relationship. The transition was pretty difficult because I went from a, 11-year relationship to none. Ended up being the single one, even though I was polyamorous. So that was abrupt.
I got divorced in 2011, and I met somebody very special immediately afterwards that I had a very intense connection with, but I didn't want to jump straight into another serious relationship. And I enjoyed being single. So I essentially had a serious relationship with her while refusing to be monogamous with her, only because I wanted to continue dating. And then after like 1 year of that, I was like, hey, there might be something to this.
Now we're going to turn to the $1 million question. And this is the question that I think a lot of people in non-monogamous relationships are used to fielding all the time. It's a question that I get basically in every single mainstream interview that I ever get asked to do. And that question is, how do you deal with jealousy? So this is a question that it's often difficult for me to answer, especially in an interview context, because it really opens up a Pandora's box. On the one hand, you have your own personal relationship with jealousy, and it's a deeply personal relationship. I think it's connected to your personal insecurities, to your trauma, your mental health. It's connected to what coping mechanisms just you have equipped as a human being for getting through a rough emotional patch. But then on the other hand, the question also prompts us to look at a much bigger picture. What is it that we've been told from our society about jealousy as a feeling? What are the cultural narratives that we grew up with that explain how jealousy and love interact with each other? And, things like, does maybe growing up in a very competitive culture with a scarcity mindset make us much more prone to more unhealthy or toxic forms of jealousy than if we hadn't? Anyway, usually by the time that I've finished waxing all poetic about all that stuff, the interviewer is usually bored to tears, and then they just want to ask me about something more exciting, like STIs or something like that.
If there's anything that's challenging, it's that it's actually related more to my having a chronic illness and being limited in that way, and sort of being not jealous, but envious of Alex's, energy and not being in constant pain, going out, meeting people, doing things, having fun, acrobatic sex. I'm assuming I'm not there at the time. And, and it's just, I'm like, okay, it's 7:00. I'm going to bed now. that it's more overt when he has other partners, that's something I'm not getting. But that's balanced by the fact that I really appreciate he has other partners. That means I don't have to feel guilty that I'm not providing those fun evenings out and such with him. Thank God for Buddhism, honestly. I don't know what I'd do without it.
I think that it was just trying it that made it feel like something that I could do. I remember reading a whole lot of the literature, and given my personal cultural programming, so much of that seemed like foreign and impossible, and like the idea of compersion and the idea that you could not be horrendously jealous if your partner was dating somebody else. All of that felt like such a massive obstacle and hurdle. And I'm like, the people who are writing these books are superhuman. I could never possibly reach that point in my life or my relationship. And then now I'm like, oh yeah, this is no big deal.
And then I found out I wasn't as jealous as I expected either. Like there obviously is still jealousy, but there have been times where I was confronted with situations that I think would have activated like a primal sense of jealousy. But I like down to my core was like, oh, that's so cute. So that was surprising.
I still get twinges sometimes, but by and large, having done a whole lot of processing and a lot of work as a client and of a really talented somatic experiencing practitioner, I've worked most of that stuff out. And so the twinges are pretty minimal. I'm secure enough in myself and trust myself enough that I know my partners aren't going to leave me if they have another date with someone else.
So as you can see, people have pretty varied ways in how they personally respond to jealousy. And in my opinion, it becomes apparent pretty quickly that jealousy is really not the only challenge that's inherent in non-traditional relationships. When I read about people's stories in our Patreon community, when I listen to the clients that I work with, I notice that, people definitely struggle with jealousy sometimes and feel like it's a challenge, but the majority of people, I think, are finding challenges in other things, things like holding boundaries. How do I deal with these feelings of being left out? How do I deal with this tough decision making? How can I show up in my relationship and be honest and vulnerable even when it's difficult to? And it's like all these challenges that are nuanced and complex and, most importantly, pretty universal. I think these are things that most of us struggle with in our relationships, and that's regardless of whether it's a romantic relationship or a family relationship or even a relationship with friends or with coworkers.
The biggest thing I think is probably personally like dating more than one person and kind of that FOMO sort of feeling of time, having to choose to allocate time. Sometimes my things have been more long distance relationship sort of things where there's very clear, okay, I'm traveling this week to see a person. So that's a very clear demarcation of time and all that. If it's a little bit more kind of the day to day, that's a little bit of a weirder transition, I think. It's kind of that scheduling and allocation of time, both, my own allocation, also someone else's, that if someone else is kind of like, oh, I want to see that concert or that movie, having that not be a thing that we share. And likewise, like if I'm choosing what concert to go to with, that's also a challenge. I'm definitely a fairly FOMO driven person, I think. So it's kind of, ideally all the experiences with all the people I care about. And so it's hard feeling like missing out on something or causing a partner to miss out.
For me, it's been my metas and like navigating those relationships and like learning boundaries more than just like, what am I okay with? Like learning what boundaries are just healthy to have in place, regardless of like, if in a moment it doesn't hurt you to hear something, you still maybe shouldn't know it. And like keeping relationships separate, because I was close friends with like the main serious meta that I had before either of us were dating our shared partner. And so like learning to keep those 7 relationships, like all really separate and like intentionally partitioned.
The biggest challenges I faced recently are making like big life decisions with multiple established partners in mind. I'm currently in grad school, which means that in the next couple of years, whenever I finish my PhD, I'm going to be in the same position of like starting to find a more permanent career and just having to make decisions around that based on multiple people is really challenging because you can't just move the whole polycule to a new town, although we're talking about it.
The thing that's most challenging, I think, for me is I think that a lot of people still operate, even people who've been doing polyamory for a long time, still kind of operate under a very hierarchical structure. And to a certain extent, like, especially when you have people living together, if you have children, if you have those sort of built-in entanglements, that makes sense. You have responsibilities. But I have found that when people haven't done the work to question that and why they treat people that way, it can lead to a lot of just sort of treating people as sort of disposable. And I've seen it a lot with people I know who've been in polyamorous relationships. When it's a partner that's outside their nesting partner, I've seen a lot of that kind of happen. And there's still, I think, a big learning curve there.
I kind of stopped giving a crap. Just kind of recognizing that like everything has fallen apart so far, and it wasn't at all to do with me or me being poly. It was to do with either me not communicating that to people clearly enough, or it was just a really poor choice of partners previously. And so recognizing that has to be a conversation that's had enthusiastically at the very beginning of a relationship has made a huge difference. Yeah. just making sure that like anyone who does decide to get into a relationship with me understands if they want to be in that kind of relationship, because otherwise they don't want me. They just, think I'm cute. And just trying to make connections with people in any capacity has always been kind of a struggle for me. Like once I decided I didn't care, if people decided that I wasn't like worth their time, because that's saving me a whole lot of wasted effort trying to do the whole emotional vulnerability thing with someone that doesn't appreciate it. So it's more like the social anxiety.
It's always challenging because the level of honesty, self-honesty and honesty with your partners that it requires requires work. It requires some or putting myself in a place where I can be like that. So I've had to align my inner and outer worlds. And so I'm no longer a pastor. And so I can be transparent. And I couldn't be doing this if I had to be hiding, I think. For me personally, it requires me to be pretty much out there about everything.
I'd say the biggest challenge that I've faced was when communication gets triangulated. So when you're talking to multiple people about the same situation and something always gets lost in translation, that can be a little difficult.
Scheduling. I know that's the cliche, but yeah.
And next, we're going to take a little deeper dive into what we like to call monogamy hangover. To put it briefly, monogamy hangover is when all of our indoctrinated beliefs about relationships and love and sex get in the way of us wanting to do relationships differently. There really are so many forces that encourage us to believe that things like true love can only be monogamous, or true love can only be heterosexual, or true love means you have to get legally married. Our culture, the media, the church, the government, they all push us in this particular direction. And that means that it can be extremely difficult for those of us who want to go against the tide.
The thing that's coming to mind is how deeply embedded mononormative thinking is, like how much prying out of wiring was required. I think of myself as a intellectual, self-reflexive, possibly over-reflective person. And it's still just so much like, oh no, that's not an innate thing or a given thing. That's a thing that our culture has told us. And it went on for years, and it never caused us any big problems. But I've seen lots of other people have problems that are just so clearly tied to it. And even though they know what's causing it, and even though they want to overcome it, it's so hard. It's really stunning how baked in mononormativity is.
Feeling that, dealing with the fact that I am not the most special, the best, and the only one, it's been a challenge, and this is something I work on for myself. It is still a challenge.
I guess what I didn't expect was the kind of mental labor that was necessary to, shed all the years of learning monogamy, basically. Like I had the first year was really, really tough. And like, I felt my brain was rewiring quite a lot. And like, it needed a lot of mental work to not think the same thoughts that I was conditioned to think. Because you base your whole life around your ideas of your like relationship and marriage and kids, and like, or at least I did, or like people around me do a lot. And so if you're doing good in monogamy, your life is success. And if you're not doing good, like you're a failure, basically, if you can't bring someone to family gatherings. Or if you bring different people to family gatherings, then it's also a problem. What was really surprising was that after that first year of really tough times, it was really easygoing. Like once everything made sense, it like kind of clicked, and now I'm like, wow, why do people still do this? No one has to suffer like that. So why can't you just be poly?
The most surprising thing I found, I think when I started, I had this still very monogamous idea of what like consensual, like non-monogamous relationships could and should look like. Initially, I thought, okay, you would have basically a very hierarchical structure, and that, you would have one person who you would, that would be like your go-to, but then you could still have all the casual fun you wanted. And that was great. That was initially how I thought things were supposed to look. And then, but that is not at all how I function. And it's not at all like what I want.
The first thing that surprised me was how hard it was at the beginning. And there was like 3 solid months of every moment of our relationship felt like it was a negotiation and a conversation and a crisis. And then it was equally surprising how quickly it transitioned out of that and became comfortable. It was like, in the beginning, I had to confront all of my insecurities and biases and internal problems all at the same time. But once I went through the process of doing that, I got over a lot of them like simultaneously and quickly. So I was surprised by both how difficult it was and how quickly it was to move past that when you put the work in.
I expected there to be pros and cons, like the amount of alone time and like the learning to be more independent and like giving other people space. I kind of expected it to always feel like, okay, I will give you your space and I will be over here wishing I wasn't giving you space. But I kind of have like really been thriving in it. I also didn't expect how alienating it feels. Just, I can't like talk about my relationships like I used to. It always comes with a caveat of like, so this happened, but no, like it's fine. It was good. It's a good thing that happened. I'm fine. And like, I've always gone to my mom for advice in life, and we've always kind of been on a similar wavelength, but with this, she's so lost. She tries, but I think the bandwidth for like what you're supposed to learn to deal with is different.
Finding out how much I really, really don't want to be trying has surprised me a lot, because I love meeting people. I love getting to know people, which like that kind of goes like counter to like what people assume is like, oh, you know, this person's poly, so like obviously they're gonna want to be meeting all of the people all of the time, and I'm over here like, please God, no. Like, don't make me do that.
Something I found fascinating for myself when transitioning into polyamory, and I love talking to other people about, is the difference between what you expected to be challenging or what you expected to be good, and then what actually ends up being challenging and what actually ends up being good. So for this section, we asked our listeners, what were some things that surprised you? What was different from what you expected before you got into this, however long ago that was?
I think that the researching made it to be a bigger deal than it was, because in a lot of ways it's like, you have this pitfall, you have that pitfall, don't do this, do that, you know, and there's just so much information that have come from anecdotes and personal experiences. And I found that not all of it actually related to what I was experiencing. I also didn't expect some of the traditional monogamous norms to play through in polyamorous relationships, but I still found that happening as well. So there's still somewhat of an escalator. There's still milestones that people want to hit in their relationships. It was different, but not as different as I was anticipating.
In a way, I discovered how much I value my personal space and my alone time. It was something that I learned about myself. I never thought that I would enjoy living on my own, but now I feel that this is something that is actually, I think, for me.
Just made it super easy to make friends. I moved here. I moved to Davis not knowing anyone, and like just by joining the local poly group, very quickly had a very instant circle of friends. And nice. So it was a very pleasant surprise that I didn't really expect to end up with.
So I'm really interested to know how many of you out there have answered these questions for yourself, have thought about what the things that surprise you the most about being polyamorous or non-monogamous are. And we would love to hear that from you. So the best place to share your thoughts with other listeners is on this episode's discussion thread in our private Facebook group or Discord chat. You can get access to these groups and join our exclusive community by going to patreon.com/multiamory. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. You can email us at info@multiamory.com or leave us a voice message on Facebook. Multiamory is created and produced by Jase, Lindgren, Dedeker, Winston, and me, Emily Matlack. Our episodes are edited by Mauricio Balvanera. Our social media wizard is Will McMillan. Our production assistants are Rachel Shennework and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.